Okay, so we ended before the dinner break. I hope everyone enjoyed their dinner. At the concept that if there is no victim, if no actual wrongdoing has taken place resulting in harm to someone else, there is no crime. And many people are, being jailed for victimless crimes that they've actually never actually harmed another being, and yet their freedom has been taken away. Another aspect about this concept of the difference between right and wrong behavior is we have to understand that there is no such thing as the ability to delegate a wrong to someone else. No one can say to someone, you may harm him, unchallenged or unaccosted, okay? That you're allowed to do that morally, okay? No more than anybody can say a group of people may commit a wrongdoing, and they have the moral right to commit it, to commit that wrongdoing. There's no such thing as that. Okay? So this is what many people who believe in things like government believe in, that we can delegate to a group of people who are calling themselves a government something that is not a right and agree, all come together and agree upon, they now possess this right. Rights can't be granted by human beings to other human beings. Everybody is born with the same rights because rights don't come from human beings. Rights, like the laws of nature, come from the creator of the universe. They don't come from human beings. Human beings don't make up what right and wrong are. Right and wrong are inherent to creation and are up to us to discover and recognize what they are and then live in accordance with those principles. So if a specific action is not a right for any individual, that action cannot be, quote, delegated, granted, or licensed to any other individual or group and magically called a right. It does not become a right. If it's wrong, it remains a wrong, no matter how many people believe they can do it or delegate it or otherwise. Similarly, a right can't be turned into a wrong. If it's a right and you're not harming somebody by doing it, somebody can't magically say, well, that's a wrong and you're not allowed to do that. And yet we have things that go right hand in hand with that, and it's called government. An action that is a wrong would forever remain a wrong under natural law. So how do we know what rights are? Part of knowing rights is understand that natural law, the difference between right and wrong, always holds true regardless of a population's belief system. Like natural law being in effect, the difference between right and wrong are not dependent on anybody's belief. They are eternal truths that need to be understood. So this means it does not matter how many people agree that a wrong can be turned into a right or that a right can be turned into a wrong. Such things can never be done in reality. We can believe we can do that and act like that, but in reality, it cannot actually be done. A right forever remains a right, a wrong forever remains a wrong. People can only believe that they can claim such reversals and that this will magically make it so. Unfortunately, most human beings erroneously believe that it is morally possible for them to create and delegate rights, quote unquote, which do not exist, or to take away actual rights from people which do exist. They believe we can do that. So when in doubt as to whether an action is or is not in harmony with natural law, the visualization exercise that I always ask people to do is to imagine a scenario of a planet, a world, where there is only two people, where only two people exist on an entire planet. Okay? If the behavior in that circumstance, in that visualized instance, is either a right or a wrong, in that instance, it remains a right or a wrong in any size population, regardless of how many people may believe otherwise. Okay? So if a right is a right for one person to do toward another, okay, or if it's a wrong, the action is a wrong for one person to take toward another, population is irrelevant. People will say, well, yeah, if there was a couple of people, that would be okay. But if in a world of 7 billion people, we can't let people do that. Well, this has nothing to do with what right and wrong is. As if they're changeable. Let's look at this scenario. So there's our world, and there's two people, okay? Two well-groomed businessmen. And we're going to look at an instance. Let's look at taxation, the concept of taxation. Is taxation of any kind a right or a wrong? Is it morally acceptable and justifiable, or is it something that is actually a wrong? So let's look at what taxation really is. And again, we're not going to euphemize. We're going to talk about it straight on. So here's what taxation is. It's not what I believe it is. I'm getting down to the heart of the matter and describing what it actually is. Taxation is the claim that a specific group of people who call themselves government have been given a, quote, right. They've been delegated a right, okay? We've written down a law, and we say this people calling themselves the government and the IRS have a right to do this particular action, this activity, okay? This behavior. They've been given a right to confiscate, unwillingly, I might add, an arbitrarily chosen percentage of the product of another individual's labor. Now let me just start with this, right? If you ask anybody, how many are you going to voluntarily pay more taxes? Nobody will raise their hand. And you say, why not? Well, because I could barely afford to pay the ones I'm paying now, and I don't want to volunteer any more money toward that endeavor. Quite frankly, I want my resources for myself to use as I see fit voluntarily. But if the government then said, well, your taxes are going up by 5%, how many people would pay them? Most people would. Because subconsciously or consciously, they recognize they're under coercion. They're actually under duress. They're being told that if they don't give this at the command of the people who are confiscating it, that some form of violence will be conducted upon them, whether through the form of fining them and saying, we're going to take more of your resources, whether by saying, we're going to throw you in a cage and make you stay there for as long as we say you need to stay there, okay? Or by actually conducting actual physical harm upon them. So, again, we're saying that this quote-unquote right is given to individuals who call themselves government, and then they have the right to confiscate this arbitrarily chosen percentage of the product of another individual's labor. Because that's what money is, okay? Or that's what, whatever we make through what we work, that's the product of our labor. We work and then we get compensated for it. So that's an exchange for labor that we have done. That's our property, because we gave labor in return for that. So this is done whether or not the other agrees to share that product voluntarily. It's not a voluntary process. Coercion is involved. Taxation is enforced by the threat of violence, which is behavior that will result in bodily harm, or imprisonment, which is the taking away of physical freedom of movement, if those from whom the product is being seized attempt to resist this confiscation. This practice is always, quote, justified, and the word justify actually breaks down etymologically. The word justify means to create a right. That's what justify actually means. Jus in Latin means right or law. And then facere means to create or to make. So to justify means to create right, to make a right up and conjure it into existence. So it's always justified or made into a right, quote unquote, by those who claim that such a practice is necessary and required to, quote unquote, uphold the common good. This is the justification offered for the seizure of the product of people's labor involuntarily. Now, if we are honest with ourselves, if we define the concept of slavery, and I think this is a good definition for slavery, would it be fair to say slavery is the involuntary confiscation of 100% of the product of the labor of another human being? That be a fair definition? You're saying you're working, I'm going to take whatever you generate as a result of that work that you're doing. It doesn't belong to you. The product of your labor doesn't belong to you. All of it belongs to me. So you work for me. I take everything that you have been able to amass or create through the labor that you have done. I think everybody here would agree that's slavery. That's as good as a definition of slavery as you're probably going to get. I mean, we can come up with some other definitions that involve coercion and physically shackling and keeping people. But if we really are honest with ourselves, what is the purpose of slavery to begin with is to make others work for free and then take all of the product of the labor. That's what slavery was conducted for. Okay? So, if we're defining slavery as the involuntary confiscation of 100% of the product of the labor of another human being, we should be able to clearly see that there is no magical percentage to which we could lower this number that would no longer make it slavery. So I ask people, if the person who's saying I'm going to confiscate 100% of your labor and keep it for myself would say, well, I'm going to take 75%. I'll take 3/4. You can keep 1/4 of what you've created. Would that no longer constitute slavery? And I don't care what you say I'm going to use the 75% for. Okay? If you're telling somebody you have no choice, 75% of your labor belongs to me, would that no longer be slavery just because they allow them to keep 25? Okay, let's lower it to 50. Is it still slavery? Okay. Well, what percentage could it possibly be lowered to for it not to be slavery anymore? Only 0. There is no percentage that it could be lowered to for it not to constitute slavery. And again, if we're being honest with ourselves, many people want to justify this in many ways by saying, oh, it's used for services. Services which someone doesn't have a right to refuse. You know, I tell people, hey, if I said to you, I'm a computer technician. You own a computer? Okay. I'm now your computer technician. You're not allowed to refuse my services. Just think about that for a moment. You may not refuse that I am now providing the service for your computer to keep it in good shape. Okay? First of all, what have I just taken from that gentleman? Right to choose. Free will. Right there. That's slavery. I don't even have to keep going and say, hey, if you refuse, or, if you, whether you want or don't want my computer services, I'm now your technician, and I need $200 every year. I'll come over a couple of times. I don't care whether you're happy with my service or not, okay? And if you don't pay me, I'm coming and taking the computer. Now, is that really your property if you're living under that kind of duress? Or am I just a violent criminal who's saying I'm going to steal your stuff if you don't give me what I say? I'm holding you under extortion. That's duress. That's called duress. It means I am threatening violence unto the person unless they conform to my will. And that's what we're all held under. We're held under duress. All forms of taxation are duress. It is a master class telling people you have no right to refuse the arbitrarily set confiscation of your labor that I deem is going to be necessary for what I say it's necessary for. So how could you possibly claim that your home belongs to you if you're paying something called a property tax? That somebody is saying, for the services we provide in this community, you must pay us this percentage, and if you don't pay it, your house is going to be turned over to the government. And you know what that's called? There's a term for that, okay? When a society doesn't actually have true private property ownership rights, and a higher class of masters actually owns the land and owns the property and only allows the peasant class to live upon the property for as long as they pay tribute to the master class, who can tell me what system of government that is? That's called feudalism. And that's the United States government and just about every government on the earth. You live in feudalism. There's no such thing as democracy. There's certainly not a constitutional republic, that's for sure. Okay? The de facto state of government, which means indeed, in action, is feudalism. And feudalism is just another euphemism. It's a euphemism for slavery. Okay? Because slaves aren't allowed to own property. Slaves aren't allowed to keep the product of their labor. That's all it really is. If we're being honest with ourselves. Once again, there's my catchphrase for this section. Okay? We want to euphemize it, justify it, call it something else, right? I said this to that New Age woman at the UFO conference. And she said, again, I prefer not to see it that way. Well, you're not being honest with yourself. You're lying. It's called lying to yourself. That's what cognitive dissonance is. It's called lying to yourself. Okay? So, If we're being honest with ourselves, taxation's merely a euphemism for theft, violence, and slavery, the practices upon which it is actually based. And since no individual anywhere on earth has the right to claim ownership of the product of another's labor, such behavior can never be, quote, delegated to a group of people and called a right. Therefore, it follows logically that all forms of taxation, I don't care what they are, excise tax, property tax, gift tax, inheritance tax, income tax, I don't care what form it is, taxes on corporations even, okay? All forms of taxation are always wrong according to natural law because they are all based in the destruction of free will, they are based on coercion, and they are ultimately based upon violence, all of which are wrongdoings, all of which are forms of theft, and all of which not one individual has the right to perform upon another. And this is what people want to justify and believe can be magically turned into a right, just because they want to euphemize it and call it taxation. Let's look at another example. Prohibition. One of my favorite, it's one of my pet peeves, okay? I'm big into health, into eating right, okay? I'm huge into juicing. It's one of my favorite things to do. Purification of the body is part of purification of the mind, all right? But I'm going to tell you, I'm 100% for anybody being allowed to put anything into their body because they own their body. If I want to break up this remote control in little pieces and eat it with a sprinkling of pepper, then that's my right to do so, regardless of what the chips may do to my intestinal tract, okay? There's a reason I have the right to eat this remote if I want to. You want to know why? My body is my property. It belongs to me. Now, we did this in the natural law seminar. We asked people, do you own your own body? Almost every single student in the seminar, now, of course, they immediately answered, yes, I own my own body. The students grasped this, okay? The people they were asking the questions to, okay, because the students were doing the tabulation of, accumulating the answers from people that they asked the questions to. And one of the questions I asked them to ask people is, do you own your own body? Almost every student in my first natural law seminar, when they asked people if they own their own body, they came back to the next class and almost every student said, almost everybody they asked that question to paused for a long time and thought about it. Had to sit and think about this question. Could not immediately spit out, absolutely, my body is my property. And because I think people want to overthink things and say, well, am I going to own my body forever? I'm going to die one day. Does that mean I don't own it now? What's the over-intellectualization and mystification of this concept? I tell people, I recognize fully I'm going to die one day and this flesh is going to crumble and pass into the earth. Okay? Does that mean I don't own my body right now? I'm using my body right now. That's why I own it, specifically. Specifically because my consciousness inhabits this body and I'm using it as the vehicle for the expression of my consciousness is the very reason I own my body. Okay? And people can't spit that out. It's like unfathomable to me. The ridiculousness of some of this, that the human mind could be worked into the situation that it has been, is almost incomprehensible. So let's go forward with prohibition. Okay? It's the claim that a group of people who call themselves government have been given the right to prevent others from putting any given substance into their own bodies, and if others refuse to comply with those terms, that they will be fined or imprisoned. And it should be self-evident that if an individual's body is actually their own property, and it is, then that individual always maintains the natural right to decide what will or will not be put into their property, which is their body. Why can you put what you want into your car or your home? Because you own it. It's your property. Okay? Technically, it should be. I mean, technically it isn't really, but my whole point is nobody else can tell, no other individual can tell you what you can and can't put into your home. Okay? Could I tell you, hey, I don't want you putting that jacket in your car. You're not allowed to put it in there. Well, who am I to tell you you're not allowed to put that in there? It's your property. Okay? So why would we accept that not accept that, but we would accept I can't put something in my own body that I deem that I want in it. Okay? Because people can't separate the act of imbibing the substance or putting the substance into the body, okay, from the action that people may subsequently take. And they're two different things. So somebody might go out and want to get smashed tonight and do a bunch of drinking, but if you then go out on the street and start clubbing somebody with the nearest available blunt object, you don't have a right to do that. You had a right to go drinking, okay, any more than you would have a right to go snort some cocaine or bang some heroin into your arm, okay? I don't think those two things are particularly good ideas, but I support your right to do it. But hey, if after you do those things you go and hurt somebody else, you got to be held accountable for the actions you just took. That's what personal responsibility is all about. And these two things need to be delineated from each other. We have to clearly be able to separate the act of the right to put something into my body and me still being personally responsible for what I do with my body. Okay? So, understanding that this is a claim made to tell people that I'm going to make the decision about what you put into your body, we can easily see this claim of this right to command what will or will not be put into the body of another person. What it actually amounts to is a claim of ownership upon the body of another person. If I'm telling you you can't drink orange juice, I'm making a claim, your body belongs to me because I'm going to decide what goes into it or what does not go into it. Okay? So if I say carrots are off limits for your consumption, sir, and they may not be ingested, I've just made a claim that I own your body. Well, what's the claim on the ownership of another person's body called? Slavery. If we're not euphemizing it, and if we're being honest with ourselves. Okay? Prohibition is merely the claim of ownership upon another person's body is called slavery. Therefore, prohibition is merely a euphemism for slavery that is backed by violence, regardless of the justifications made by those who claim such practices are, quote, necessary for the common good. That's always the justification. Since no individual anywhere on earth has the right to claim the ownership of another person's body, such behavior can never be delegated to a group and magically termed a right. Therefore, all forms of prohibition are always wrong according to natural law. Doesn't matter what the substance is. Doesn't matter what it is. How destructive it may be to the body or brain. Look, if I want to go under my sink, take some cleaning supplies and make a nice cocktail with some lye and some roach poison and some rat poison, stir it up in a water solution and go glug, 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 glug. That's my right. Want to know why? Because I own my body. I own my consciousness and my body, period, the end. So if I want to do that, that's my right to do so. Okay? Nobody has a right to tell me what I can and cannot put into my body. Yet we accept this because of these justifications that, it's for the common good. Forget what rights are. You know, it's for the common good. We need to accept slavery for the common good. Yeah. Yeah, it works out like that. So how about licenses and permits? These are claims that a group of people who call themselves government. And again, we're going back and visualizing. Imagine one person trying to make this claim to another person. Nobody would find it legitimate. Nobody would find that one person may make that claim to another person. Yet we think these other people called government have rights that individuals don't have. That's what we think. That's called mind control. Mind control is getting people to accept some people have rights that other people don't have. That's what it is. You know? So go back to that visualization exercise. Can one person make that claim over another and have it be legitimate? Of course not. So if nobody has that right, how could that right be delegated to somebody else? It can't. Licenses and permits, they're claims that a group of people who call themselves government have been given the right, quote unquote, the right to prevent others from exercising specific behaviors, even if such behaviors cause no harm to others or their property. Unless those others petition, meaning beg, or pay the government for permission. That's what a permit is. It means permission to be allowed to exercise those behaviors. This amounts to the claim that rights are actually merely privileges that may be granted or revoked by government at any time. Okay? Based upon the people in government's preference their discretion. All right? Remembering that the definition of a right is any action which does not cause harm to another living being or their property, there is no such thing as the right, quote unquote, to stop another person from exercising a right. If something is a right, meaning it doesn't cause harm, there is no such thing as someone's right to stop you from performing that action. Okay? That would be called coercion, which is a wrong. Okay? So the actual ingestion of, let's say, marijuana, for example, harms no one else. You can put that into your body, sit there perfectly peacefully, and not cause harm to another living being. That's called a right, for the very specific definition that it caused no harm. Okay? I would not have the right to tell another individual, you may not do that action. That would be a wrongdoing. Well, it's the same thing for something when it comes to licenses and permits. You're telling people, hey, if you pay me $50, I'll let you smoke that marijuana without doing violence to you. Unless I change my mind. And then I won't give you a permit. I'll just say, hey, you're not allowed to do that. Even something that is a right, like assembling and speaking. Like what was done in the state of Pennsylvania a few years ago when the G20 visited it in the city of Pittsburgh. Okay? The city telling people, we have revoked the right to assemble and speak and petition for grievances. You don't have the right to come and speak. No protests will be tolerated or we'll hit you with sound and water cannons. You know? And people just laid down and accepted it. The whole city of Pittsburgh. You know? Because, oh, we're going to go and ask them for a permit. And they just said no. Nope. You don't have that right anymore. We find you on the street, you're getting blasted with a sound cannon and deafened. Some people went permanently deaf. Permanently deaf. Lost their hearing from what happened in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. You see the stuff that was happening in, it wasn't Egypt, where they were hitting people with water cannons recently and killing some of them. It was in the Middle East somewhere. Turkey, correct. You know? Hitting people, some people died getting hit in the eye with such pressure it hits the brain. People were dead from water cannons. They call these non-lethal weapons. Because they're telling you, you may not speak. You may not assemble. We're going to revoke that right, really. See, there is no right to stop someone from exercising a pre-existing right. That's you making the claim, I own your rights. That's what that's really doing. That's saying, I'm God, I get to grant what a right is or revoke what a right is at any given time. It's basically what it is. It amounts to someone claiming to be God. The claim over the rights of another person is called slavery. Even more so, it is the claim to be God. The claim that the rights of another flow from you. Therefore, licensing and permits are merely other euphemisms for slavery, regardless of the justifications made by those who claim such practices are, quote, necessary for the common good. Since no individual anywhere on earth, no single individual, has the right to claim the ownership of another person's rights, such behavior can never be delegated to a group and magically called a right. Therefore, all forms of licensing and permits, according to natural law, are always wrongdoings because they are always based in coercion and the theft of someone else's rights. So again, that's the visualization exercise. There's 3 quick examples. You have to envision there's only 2 people. Would one person have a right to conduct that action against another? If the answer is no, the right cannot be, there's no such thing as calling it a right and delegating it to other people and telling them now you're allowed to perform that behavior. It's always a wrongdoing. But people, because of this idea, this mind control called government, want to believe that that right exists, that we can delegate something that is a wrongdoing.